Good morning, and welcome to the United States Army Human Resources Command 9/11 Remembrance Ceremony in memory of the September 11th terrorist attack, to pay tribute to the victims of the attacks on 9/11 and honor our building's namesake, Lieutenant General Timothy Joseph Maude, and the others who lost their lives in the Pentagon that day. The host for today's ceremony is the Commander of the United States Army Human Resources Command, Major General Tom Drew, and Command Sergeant Major Anthony McAdoo. Please rise for the presentation of the colors by the members of the United States Army Human Resources Command, Sergeant Audie Murphy Association, the playing of our national anthem, and the invocation given by Chaplain David Stoner.
If you are willing, will you please bow your heads in prayer with me? Our Heavenly Father, you are our hope and our refuge. In our times of distress, you have been our strong tower. And all the shock and the horror of this tragic day has subsided for so many. May the memory of those departed souls never be forgotten. We come remembering the loss and the sacrifices, but we come in hope, not in ourselves, but in you. In commemorating this tragedy, we give you thanks for your presence in our time of need. We give you thanks for the comfort in our time of pain. And we give you thanks for this great nation and all of those who work to defend her. In your name we pray. Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. We are honored to welcome several distinguished guests to our ceremony today. Our keynote speaker, Mrs. Terry Maude, Lieutenant General Maude's widow. Mrs. Maude is joined today by her daughter Kathleen and son-in-law Dave. In addition, numerous members of the Maude and Campbell families are also in attendance. Thank you for making the trip. Mr. Roy Wallace, Assistant Deputy Chief of Staff, G1, Headquarters, Department of the Army. Mrs. Kay Drew, spouse of Major General Tom Drew, United States Army Human Resources Command, Commanding General. Mrs. Bevan McAdoo, spouse of Command Sergeant Major Anthony B. McAdoo, United States Army Human Resources Command, Command Sergeant Major. Major General Johnny Davis, United States Army Cadet Command and Fort Knox Commanding General, and his spouse, Mrs. Stacy Davis. Command Sergeant Major Jeremiah Gann, United States Army Cadet Command and Fort Knox Command Sergeant Major. Major General Jeff Broadwater, 5th Corps Deputy Commanding General, and his spouse, Mrs. Alicia Broadwater. Major General Adam Yokes, 5th Corps Deputy Commanding General of Interoperability, and his spouse, Agata Yokes. Colonel Lance O'Brien, Fort Knox Garrison Commander. Command Sergeant Major William Fogel, Fort Knox Garrison Command Sergeant Major. This weekend marks the 20th anniversary of a day upon which we reflect and pay tribute to the victims who lost their lives in New York, at the Pentagon, and in the countryside of Shanksville, Pennsylvania. The events of 9/11 and the global war on terror strengthen our nation's resolve and our Army's commitment to remain vigilant and ready to meet any challenge. Many of today's soldiers were inspired to join the Army in response to the horrific events of 9/11 and have served our country valiantly ever since. It is sobering to think that their entire military service has been one of perpetual conflict and most likely included several combat deployments. In November 2009, while this complex was still under construction, Fort Knox solicited nominations from across the installation. This solicitation sought deceased soldiers and civilians who have distinguished themselves in such a manner that their memories should be perpetuated by the naming of the facility in their honor. In February 2010, a 7-member memorialization board chose Lieutenant General Timothy J. Maude, the most senior military member killed at the Pentagon on that fateful Tuesday morning. 2 locations in this complex, not far from here, commemorate Lieutenant General Maude's words and likeness. In our visitor center, a wall-to-wall depiction of the tragic events of his death 20 years ago tomorrow educates those who visit the United States Army Human Resources Command. The other is a bronze plaque just outside the complex's main entrance. There, Lieutenant General Maude's likeness is the first to greet many of our teammates coming to work, as well as every distinguished visitor who enters the building. And today, the career of a future Sergeant Major of the Army, or Chief of Staff of the Army, or Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, or even a potential Secretary of Defense is being skillfully managed by a professional development non-commissioned officer or career manager who comes to work in a building named for a former enlisted soldier and senior Army leader. Ladies and gentlemen, the Commanding General of United States Army Human Resources Command, Major General Tom Drew.
One of the worst days in Americans' history saw some of the bravest acts in American history. We'll always honor the heroes of 9/11. Those words were spoken by President George W. Bush at the Pentagon on 2008, 7 years after the attack. Good morning, everybody, and it's a beautiful day, fitting for what we're doing here today. It is an honor for me to welcome you to today's ceremony in honor of the 9/11 heroes and reflect on the events that occurred 20 years ago. A very special thank you to the members of the Maude family who made the journey to be here with us today. With us today, accompanying Miss Maude, are her daughter Kathleen and son-in-law Dave. Her daughter Karen wasn't able to make it, but she's certainly here in spirit. I did also want to thank Lieutenant General Maude's brother, Dan Maude, and his family for being here, as well as Lieutenant General Maude's sister, Carol Webb, and her husband for being here. Additionally, Miss Maude's 3 brothers, John, Jim, and David Campbell, all made the trip today as well. And while she couldn't attend in person, we also want to thank Command Sergeant Major Retired Deb Strickland for providing her thoughts, which you will hear during the ceremony. Tomorrow morning, 20 years will have elapsed since the Al-Qaeda attack on the Pentagon and the World Trade Center. Nearly 3,000 Americans died in that attack. We are here this morning to remember and pay our respects to the 185 Americans that perished in the Pentagon. Included in that list of names is the namesake for the U.S. Army Human Resources Command Complex, Lieutenant General Timothy Maude, the G1 of the Army. Anyone who served with or for Lieutenant General Maude can attest that he truly cared about soldiers and all of our families. We here at HRC are proud to work each day in the Maude complex. His plaque by the entrance reminds us each day to live up to General Maude's standard of professional excellence in all we do. I'm sure all of you remember where you were exactly the moment you heard about the terrorist attack on 9/11. Now, imagine if you had a family member at one of the attack sites, didn't know if your loved one was safe, and then ultimately were notified that they'd passed away during the attack and weren't coming home. That day, September 11th, 2001, will not only be a day that you can never forget, but that heart-wrenching loss you will feel periodically throughout your life during special moments when it reminds you of the fallen, and it's a tough thing, and I appreciate the Maude family and being here and all of you sharing your stories with us. We in the military have a solemn and enduring duty not to have the families of those we've lost bear that burden alone. We must all live up to the oaths we've taken and the creeds we live by. Whether it's the warrior ethos, the soldier creed, the ranger creed, and many others, they all have one stanza in common: I will never leave a fallen comrade. Inherent in never leave a fallen comrade is the duty to never forget the fallen. So to the Maude family and all those families that lost loved ones 20 years ago, we are still here. We will forever honor the selfless service of Lieutenant General Maude and the sacrifice that your family has made on behalf of our country. And now I'd like to introduce our first guest speaker, Mr. Wallace. Like was mentioned in the bio, he's the Deputy G1 of the United States Army. Mr. Wallace has served in uniform and out for a little over 40 years. From 1978 to 2004, he was a field artillery officer, and then he was integrated into the Senior Executive Service and has served since as the Director of Plans and Resources for the Army G1. In this role, he's responsible for justifying something that is near and dear to every soldier's heart: military pay for all active duty, Guard, and Reserve soldiers. In addition to ensuring we receive our pay each month, he shares even more of his time in the service of soldiers and their families by serving on the boards of AAFES and AUSA. So, Mr. Wallace, thank you for being here with us today and sharing this moment. And without further ado, Mr. Wallace.
I'm just a tad shorter. So good morning, everyone. Before I get into my words, I'd just like to reflect on this wonderful climate that we have right now. Having been in the Pentagon on that day, it was very much like this. The temperature, the blue skies, the sunshine, it was just a normal day. So good morning. I'm Roy Wallace, and I am a soldier for life and a 9/11 survivor. I was there in the Pentagon, not 50 feet from where the plane slid through that day. When I remember that day, probably because I'm the resource manager and a statistician by trade, I can't help but think of it in terms of numbers and background stories. 8:46, the time that the first plane hit the tower of the World Trade Center. Over 2,700, the number of deaths in the World Trade Center. 275, the people that were assigned to the desk per, now the G1, on 9/11. 77, the number of the flight that was bound for Los Angeles that day. 5, the number of terrorists that were on board that flight. 7,256, the gallons of fuel that were aboard that plane. 9:37, the time that Flight 77 disappeared from radar and a few minutes later impacted the Pentagon. 1, the newly renovated wedge that we had just occupied in the Pentagon. 29, the number of desk per comrades that died that day. We must never forget the stories that accompany that day. There are many stories of fate, courage, heroism, and hope. Captain Holly Pierce got up from her desk that day because she had a craving for a raspberry smoothie. Just a few minutes later, the plane destroyed her workspace. Fate. Dr. Brian Jack, a good friend of mine, a fellow SES from OSD. He was aboard Flight 77. He was on his way to California for a meeting with Rand Corporation on the West Coast. Fate. Specialist Chin Moon Pak was on the phone in the front office. She was talking with her fiancé. She was at the very beginning of what really should have been a very promising, bright career in the United States Army. Mr. Max Belkey. He was in a meeting with Lieutenant General Maude that day. He was nearing the end of his career. He was ready to retire, his second retirement as a master sergeant. Max was no stranger to danger. He was the last soldier out of Vietnam, Saigon, back in 1973. Lieutenant Colonel George Rashawn got up to go to the men's room on the corridors and will be forever known as the man in stall number 2 when the plane hit the building. Sergeant Major Larry Strickland, the desk per sergeant major, came to work that morning to say farewell to all of his friends as it was his last day on active duty. Colonel Gerald Barrett, Debbie Holman, and I were in the middle of a conference call with HRC, and we were discussing family group life insurance, which was implemented in 2001. And we were 10 minutes away from General Maude's office coming back in to explain to him why Prudential Life Insurance wouldn't make it opt-out was going to make it opt-out instead of opt-in. And Phil McNair, the desk per XO, was holding his XO's meeting in the conference room. After the plane impacted, 9 of the 11 attendees made their way towards the A-ring. 2 turned towards the E-ring. September the 11th was a day of tragedy, but it also prompted the reawakening of the American spirit. It produced countless testaments to resilience of the American people. Since that time, we have built and reconstituted hundreds of units. We've built the end strength of the Army up 87,000 to bring it down again. We will never forget those that died on September the 11th and the thousands of others that have passed since then. I know that Lieutenant General Maude, if he was here today, would be justifiably proud of what the personnel community has done and its accomplishments. They have been nothing short of amazing, and he would urge us to continue to honor those that we lost that day by our continued service to this great nation and the soldiers that support our freedom. I think there is no greater tribute to him or any of those that we lost that day. Thank you very much for attending.
Please join me in welcoming Command Sergeant Major Anthony McAdoo to read a message from Command Sergeant Major retired Deb Strickland, the widow of Sergeant Major Larry L. Strickland.
Good morning, everyone. It's my honor to tell you a little bit about Command Sergeant Major retired Deborah Strickland, the widow of Sergeant Major Larry L. Strickland, who was serving as the Army G1 Sergeant Major at the Pentagon on 9/11. Command Sergeant Major Deborah Strickland served over 36 years, including deployments to Afghanistan after the 9/11 attacks. She served as the first Command Sergeant Major of Installation Management Command when it was formed in 2006. She was a fierce advocate and strong supporter for quality of life issues and worked in the development programs such as the First Sergeant Barracks Initiative. As a Gold Star spouse, Deborah Strickland was instrumental in establishing the Larry L. Strickland Educational Leadership Award, which honors the memory of her husband, Sergeant Major Larry Strickland. This annual award is given to an Army NCO who exemplifies the Army's vision and mobilizes others in shaping our future leaders while practicing excellent stewardship of the nation's most precious resource, its soldiers. Now, unfortunately, Command Sergeant Major retired Strickland could not be here with us today, although she very much wanted to be. I personally truly appreciate that she took the time to write us a letter about her experience on that day, and am honored to read that. So now, ladies and gentlemen, in the words of Command Sergeant Major retired Deborah Strickland, Good morning. I would like to thank Colonel Gilbert, young Sergeant Major Lanier, and all of those responsible for a remembrance ceremony that marks the 20th anniversary of my husband's death at the Pentagon on September 11, 2001. I realize many lives were lost on that date, and it is a national tragedy, but it remains a private and personal tragedy for my family and for me. Such a wonderful start to September. It will be a glorious fall day, and we were conducting a closed access exercise at Fort Belvoir, where I was the command sergeant major for the garrison. Larry left for work that morning early, after admonishing me that he still had to fulfill his military obligations until the very day he signed out on transition leave. I understood his decision, though I had a list of projects he was behind on, but I accepted that those chores would have to wait. It was to be our last conversation as he kissed me goodbye and left for work. A short time later, my life, the lives of his children, and those who knew and loved him was changed forever. I've replayed that morning in my mind many times, realizing how much I lost in the span of a 15-minute conversation. The Military District of Washington Engineer Unit was deployed to the Pentagon, which enabled me to be on site as the difficult task of recovery began. The people of my Fort Belvoir community, especially those of the garrison, and my garrison commander, Colonel Kurt Weaver, became a lifeline of support. So did members of the G1 family, as Mrs. Terry Maude reached out from her own heartache. Their actions remain a cherished memory when little else comforted me and Larry's family. Since that day, I served an additional 8 years in the military, reluctant to leave a career I deeply loved after losing the only person who mattered more. When you care for soldiers and their families, it strengthens your focus on what you can do more than what you have lost. So I'm forever grateful for the chance to stand among those who have worn and still wear the uniform. Now, as we turn a corner on the war that started with terrorist attacks in our country, it should not be lost on us that our people, our communities, are the strength of our nation. Resilient, morally strong, able to overcome our differences for a common goal. Those were the traits that I believed my husband Larry possessed. May they be the ones that we all share. Command Sergeant Major Retired Deborah Strickland.
We welcome again Major General Drew.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have the incredible honor to introduce our keynote speaker today. Miss Terry Maude is a tremendous example of Gold Star spouses who support us and continue to serve our nation despite their personal tragedy and sacrifice. Mrs. Maude grew up in neighboring Indiana and earned a degree in English, psychology, and a Master's of Science degree in education from Indiana University. As a Gold Star spouse, Miss Maude demonstrated great courage and resolve after 9/11, traveling the world to speak about Lieutenant General Maude and help dedicate a number of facilities like our home here at HRC. She has chose to serve the next generation of Army leaders in helping create and then serving as secretary of the Maude Foundation, which has started in lieu of flower donations and ultimately donated more than $175,000 to soldiers in the Green to Gold program. The Adjutant General Corps Regimental Association created the Terry Maude and Deborah Strickland Spouse Medal to recognize the contributions and achievements of the Adjutant General Corps Regimental Association spouse and widows at the National Association level. Mrs. Maude has earned many awards for her countless contributions, but we're here today to listen to her speak, so I ask that you do just that. Listen to her incredible story and remember who we lost on that fateful day in 2001. Ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Terry Maude.
Good morning. I'm even shorter. First, I want to thank Colonel Drew, Colonel Gilbert, Mr. Wallace, Command Sergeant Major McAdoo, and all of you who, even in a small way, helped make today possible. And I know that while there are a lot of people sitting under the little shaded tent things who said, yeah, we did that, there are a lot of you standing against that wall went, right. So thanks to all of you standing against the wall too, because I understand the deal. There were 2,997 people killed on September 11th, 2001 in New York, the Pentagon, and Shanksville. Today is about 184 who gave their lives at the Pentagon. Of those, 125 were in the building, and 59 were on Flight 77 that crashed into it. Those of you with hair color a little darker than mine need to remember a couple of things. One, in 2001, the internet was still in its infancy. There was no Google. There were no iPads. There were no smartphones. Even mobile phones were relatively new. Long-distance calls were placed on your rotary or punch pad phone, and they cost money for each minute that you were speaking. There were no social media outlets, no texting, no Twitter, no Facebook. You're probably asking yourselves, how on earth did they ever get any information? How on earth did we get breaking news on any kind of anything? Well, the answer to that is we turned on the television, usually to one of the three big networks, NBC, CBS, ABC, or that really kind of news station, CNN. But that's how most of America learned about the attacks of September 11th, from watching on TV. Watching it on TV is in many ways, I think, united us on that day. We were all seeing pretty much the same thing, the same way, and on some level feeling the same emotion and the same visceral response to what we saw. And we were all seeing it at the same time, raw and unfiltered by extraneous commentary or hastily gathered talking heads. That is how I learned about the attacks. I was TDY in San Diego, California, a 3-hour time distance from the East Coast. And was my habit when I was TDY, I got up, flipped on the TV in my hotel room as I prepared for the day. Tower 1 was burning, but no one was sure why. Many thought it was a small plane that got tragically and accidentally off course. After brushing my teeth, I came back out and I watched the plane go into Tower 2. Clearly not an accident. As I sat and watched in horror as the events unfolded on TV in New York, I saw a small inset in the bottom right-hand corner of the TV. It was pictures of the Pentagon in flames. My boss called me to tell me that a plane had hit the Des side of the Pentagon. And I paused to apologize. I still call it Des, even though I know it's G1. I called the girls, and I called Tim's family and my parents, and my message to all of them was pretty much the same. I don't know any more than you do about what's going on. Go home, grab somebody you love, and turn on the TV. There were 275 people working in Des on 11 September. Tim's entire front office staff was killed or injured in the attack. 23 other Des people were also killed. Of the 125 Pentagon personnel killed that day, 27% of them were working in Des. Another 37% of Des personnel were injured. A casualty rate like that on a battlefield would result in that unit being pulled from the line. We didn't have that luxury. Everyone at their desk in Tim's office that morning was killed. His civilian secretary, Deb Rumsauer, left a husband and 2 early-grade children. His Sergeant Major, Larry Strickland, was cleaning out his desk preparing to retire on 1 October after 30 years of service. He left a wife, 2 sons, and a daughter. His military assistant, Lieutenant Colonel Kip Taylor, was to change jobs 1 October and left behind a 2-year-old son and a wife due to deliver their 2nd child in October. Specialist Craig Edmondson did all of Tim's graphic work and presentations. He left a wife and 2 children. Sergeant First Class Jose Calderon had been in the Army for 19 years and left a wife and 2 children. Mr. Gerald Fisher, Max Bilkey, Gary Smith, and Terry Lynch were all civilian contractors and were in a meeting with Tim, and they left behind wives and a total of 10 children. Suni Pak was just beginning her military career and newly engaged. Sergeant Tamara Thurman had served for 8 years. I knew or had met most all of those killed or injured in Des Peres, and I knew everyone in Tim's office. Before I finish my story of that day, I want to share stories of 2 of his staff that I knew best, Kip Taylor and Larry Strickland. I first met Specialist 4, Larry Strickland, in Heidelberg, Germany in the late 70s, when we were both working for the Special Actions Branch of Military Personnel Center Europe, Milpersen at Kilborn-Kaserne in Spetsingen, Germany. I was the chief of line of duty investigations, and Larry was overseeing separations and related disciplinary actions. Larry was the first person you saw when you opened the door to the building. Now, we didn't have foot traffic. It was mostly staff personnel coming in and out of that building. But as such, his was the first face that you saw, which could be a good thing or a bad thing, depending on how his day was going. But he was always polite. As time passed, we developed a friendship, an office friendship, complete with sarcastic comments to one another and coffee-spewing laughter. Fast forward a long time, many years, and Sergeant Major Larry Strickland was the Des Peres Sergeant Major. I can remember one night after a reception of some sort at our quarters, Larry and I found ourselves on the front porch of our quarters, which overlooked a vista of Washington, D.C. and the mall. We were standing there together, and I remember saying to him, "Who would have thought when we first met that either of us would be standing here?" He put his arm around my shoulder, I put my arm around his waist, and he said, "In those days, not a chance in hell." I put my head on his shoulder and we grinned. It's a great memory. My first contact with Captain Kip Taylor was in a phone call to him. He was an instructor at the Adjutant General School at Fort Harrison, outside Indianapolis, and I was working in the Education Center on post. And I called to ask him if he would allow some of his students to come to the Education Center to do college course testing instead of going to his silly mandatory study hall. He said yes. He later became the aide to the CG, and since our quarters were right next door to the CG's, we would often see him come and go, and we would exchange waves and hellos. Again, fast forward, and Major Kip Taylor is now at the Pentagon as Tim's military assistant, in charge of all of his travel, among other things. He had been with Tim a little over a year and was due to change jobs in October. In Tim's mind, Kip's more important role was that of being what Tim always referred to as one of his Iron Majors. Kip Taylor, Terry Campbell, Denise Corley, Linda Glisson, and a few others were Iron Majors whose career Tim had been following since they were captains. This was a group of majors that Tim could go to and ask questions and know he would get an unfiltered, honest opinion. He trusted them, and they him. There was a mutual trust and respect there that also allowed all of us to be our off-duty selves. We would gather together for cookouts, sometimes bar hopping, and we'd go out to dinner. After one such evening out, Tim and I went back to that same location by ourselves, and we were greeted by the same server who had been with us on our earlier visit. And the server said, "Oh, it's Sir and Ma'am. Where's everybody else?" We cracked up. It was a great memory. Many of you are smiling now. Each one of you over 30 probably has a story to tell as well. And I think that's what today is about, stories and memories. Gold Star father Gazir Khan has said memory, like her daughter history, is what the past means to us in the present as we navigate to the future. Do we miss all those taken from us too soon? Absolutely. But diminished is the retching grief of this day. Now there are our stories. Some are sad, but a lot are happy ones, and of course our memories. I remember the phone call I got the afternoon of September 11th from the Vice Chief of Staff. He told me things did not look good for Des-Per. Des-Per had taken a really hard hit, and he asked what he could do. I said, "Sir, you can get me the hell out of here." He told me the only planes flying right now was the president's plane. And I replied, "Sir, I'm not picky." He assured me that they were working the issue because there were no commercial flights flying. He said, "We're working it, Terry, we're working it. I'll get back with you." And he did. And the Navy flew me out of San Diego the next morning. My hardest memory was my first visit to the Pentagon after the attacks on Saturday. I stood looking up at the still standing wall, and I saw pictures of the previous Des-Pers hanging unmarred, unscarred, in what was the outer office. That is when I fully realized that Tim's office was the lowest part of the broken part of the Pentagon. Tim's remains were identified, and I received that dreaded visit by an officer and a chaplain on the 19th of September. Tim was buried in Arlington on 6 October 2001. And I have to take a minute to brag about my Des-Per family during that time. The annual meeting of the Association of the United States Army and the Army 10-miler were canceled in 2001 because of security concerns. There were about 50 people in Des-Per who did a run for the fallen heroes to raise money for a group of Des-Per volunteers who had formed to take care of Des-Per families. That volunteer group provided meals for all of the families of those killed and injured. They gave teddy bears to all the children of the fallen families, even to my 2 daughters who were adults. They made Halloween surprise packets, provided Thanksgiving dinners, and made Christmas gift baskets. They called every family at least twice a month to ask how they were doing and if they needed anything. A group of 10 or so came to my house 2 days in a row to help me write nearly 2,500 acknowledgments for the sympathy cards or letters I had received. That's what Army families do. They reach out, they take care, and they gather in. Today, I ask that each of you tell your story. Each of us has a story of where we were, how we heard, who we knew, much like I have shared today. Those stories are important. Those collective stories are a part of our history, our personal history, and when woven together form the tapestry of our nation's history. Sometimes we hear the phrase, lost to history. It doesn't mean the event didn't take place. It means there are no longer any records available. Why? Because in part, there are no longer people to tell the story. History is a collection of our stories. Much of our history that we do know comes from letters and diaries. stories of the life and time that they were written. Do you realize that only 14 states teach 9/11 history? It's up to us to teach that history. This building is more than its name. It's not just about Tim, even though it bears his name. It's about people, the 184 we honor today, and the nearly 500,000 you care for in one way or another each time you sit at your desk and power up your computer. You have been tasked to take care of our Army's most precious asset, its people. Everything you do in this building is about people. It affects the lives of soldiers and their families. I'm asking you to take on a renewed and a special responsibility as you enter in and out of the Maude complex. And particularly when you bring someone new into the group. And it goes way beyond giving passwords and the path to the restrooms and eateries. It's to tell the story of this building, who and what it stands for, what it means to be managing people's lives, and not just ordinary people, soldiers and their families. We form new families of our heart in the Army, our Army family when our biological families aren't there. Army families, reaching out, taking care, gathering in. It is the heart of what you are all about, and it's the most important work you can do. It is a calling. It is a profession. It is a promise to take care of that soldier and their family. It is the epitaph I put on Tim's gravestone. It says, "He took care of soldiers." Once you have done that, there is nothing more to say and nothing more honorable you can do. That is how we pay tribute to the 184 lives lost at the Pentagon. Thank you for taking care of soldiers. Defend and serve.
Please join me in welcoming Sergeant Major Ramel Boyd.
Good morning. On the tragic events of September 11, I was... Good morning again. On the tragic events of September 11, I was a senior at Wakefield High School in Arlington, Virginia. My high school was within 3 miles of the Pentagon. On a clear sunny day, it was not uncommon to see the Pentagon while at football or soccer practice. While sitting in English class watching the events of the World Trade Center unfold on the news, I felt the impact of American Airlines Flight 77 as it hit the western side of the Pentagon. I knew that day I wanted to serve in the world's greatest army. 184 people were killed at the Pentagon on September 11. Their names are listed on your program. Please join me for a 184-second long moment of silence. During the moment of silence, you're welcome to review their names and reflect on the lives lost and the incredible sacrifices so many have made since that day. Thank you.
At this time, the United States Army Human Resources Command Ceremonial Honor Guard will conduct a flag folding ceremony in honor of Lieutenant General Maude, Sergeant Major Strickland, and all the soldiers and civilians who lost their lives that day at the Pentagon.
During the folding of the flag, you may notice how the meticulous process results in the flag being folded 13 times. You may have thought this symbolized the original 13 colonies. However, each step has a separate and very distinct meaning. The first fold of our flag is a symbol of life. The second fold represents the 50 states of the United States of America. The third fold is made in honor and remembrance of the veterans departing our ranks, who gave a portion of their lives for the defense of our country to attain peace throughout the world. The fourth fold represents loyalty. These are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will, in the crisis, shrink from the service of their country, but he that stands it now deserves the love and thanks of man and woman. Thomas Paine. The fifth fold is a tribute to our country, for in the words of Stephen Decatur, our country, in dealing with other countries, may she always be right, but it is still our country, right or wrong. The sixth fold is for where our hearts lie. It is with our heart that we pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The seventh fold is a tribute to our armed forces, for it is through the armed forces that we protect our country and our flag against all her enemies, whether they be found within or without the boundaries of our republic. The eighth fold is a tribute to selfless service. Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. John Fitzgerald Kennedy. The ninth fold is a tribute to womanhood, for it has been through their faith, their love, loyalty, and devotion that the character of the men and women who have made this country great has been molded. The 10th fold is a tribute to the Father, for he, too, has given his sons and daughters for the defense of our country since they were first born. The 11th fold is inscribed on the Statue of Liberty. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses, yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. The 12th fold represents equality. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. They are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The 13th and final fold, or when the flag is completely folded. The stars are uppermost, reminding us of our nation's motto, in God we trust. After the flag is completely folded and all tucked in, it takes on the appearance of a cocked hat, ever reminding us of the soldiers who served under General George Washington and the sailors and Marines who served under Captain John Paul Jones, who were followed by their comrades and shipmates in the armed forces of the United States, preserving for us the rights, privileges, and freedoms we enjoy today.
Please stand for the 21-gun salute, the playing of taps, and remain standing for the benediction and the retiring of the colors.
One last time, if you will bow your heads with prayer, in prayer with me. Our Heavenly Father, as we depart this solemn ceremony, may we take with us the memory of these great people. Help us to rest in your peace and to find hope in your comfort. Help us to carry the torch of justice and freedom as we leave to serve others and to always put soldiers first. In your name we pray. Amen.
This concludes today's ceremony. The United States Army Human Resources Command is grateful for your attendance.